BimBeats evolved from being a tool that was automatically capturing model health to now being more focused on people. And I think that was what resonated most with me and with my career, and my passion and purpose for what I want to do was like, I'd always worked 50, 60 hours a week, every single week. And I just thought that was the norm. But it was the norm with the high performers or the people that were really passionate about what they were doing. And I think a lot of organizations take those people for granted. And for me, this opportunity to use BimBeats to go, right, these are the superstars within your business and the people that are automating things, building tools. But now we can use those skills and try and scale it across the entire organization. So uncovering like quiet achievers, I think is my biggest kind of proud moment, I guess, with BimBeats, that it really does uncover those people who might be in the corner, might be working from home, and it doesn't matter whether you're working from home or in the studio, but you really uncover the value that those people add.
Have you ever wondered how much time your team loses just waiting for Revit to open? Today's guest, Matt Wash, CEO of BimBeats, turned that exact frustration into a business. From CAD tech to structural engineer at Arup to leading design technology at leading architectural firms, Matt's journey led him to build a tool that shows firms where their models and their teams are really performing. In this episode, we get into how to track the health of your BIM and turn wasted minutes into profit, why uncovering hidden super users can actually supercharge your project profits, and what BimBeats data reveals about where teams are actually spending their time. If you care about efficiency, culture, scaling tech inside your architectural practice, this one's for you. Let's jump in with Matt from BimBeats. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm with the really special guest, Matt Wash, CEO of BimBeats. Matt, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jose. Great to be invited onto the show. Looking forward to it.
So Matt, it's 5 a.m. You're joining from Australia. Extremely sorry that we made you wake up this early, but I've got a ton of questions. Your background in design, in BIM, in business is something that's particularly interesting to me, and something I resonate quite well with. Before we dive into the specifics of the business, where BIM is, what you're seeing, take us back. You've got, several decades of experience behind you across different sides of the table. Why buildings? How'd you get into buildings? And
I think my story is probably similar to most people that as a kid growing up playing with Legos, that was just my happy place, and just trying to build stuff, understanding how things worked, why they worked in a certain way, and just that general curiosity, I think, drove me to want to work within a group of people that pulled together and collaborated on a holistic approach to buildings. And I think that's kind of what pulled me in the direction of getting involved early on as a CAD technician, essentially. And I think almost from day one of getting inside, I started work at Arup in the UK in 1996, and CAD was the norm then. We'd moved away from drawing boards and we were into CAD. But pretty quickly, I started to think, why am I essentially copying data that exists from one platform and recreating it in another platform? Like, surely we can just move data backwards and forwards. And my role was to basically take the engineer's idea and turn that idea into something that was buildable. But most of the time, what I was getting was a hand markup of something that was already in the head of the engineer that had been taken from an analysis package and was just being recreated, almost like for like. And I think, unfortunately, with the introduction of BIM, because the modeling side of things just comes out of the box, i.e. you're modeling a wall, you're modeling a column, you're not thinking about lines and what those lines mean, that art of turning an engineering sketch or an engineering idea into something buildable just was so inefficient, both currently with the way that we've got BIM tools, but then originally when it was just, CAD. So then back then I thought, well, I don't think I'm going to have a career doing this, because surely my role will become obsolete when technology improves, that we can move this data backwards and forwards. So I'll train and become an engineer. So I went off and part-time studied to become a structural engineer. And then when I became a structural engineer, I became the engineer that then marked up things and gave it to a technician. And again, I just thought, well, this wasn't what I wanted to do and why I wanted to study to become an engineer. So I suggested to my boss at the time, like, why can't I design and document my projects? And my boss turned around and said, pretty much that's how architecture works, right? You don't typically have an architect that just does one thing and they hand that off to a technician. There obviously are architectural technician roles, but yeah, go and have a crack at it. And I was then, like, after a while of doing that on my own projects, I suggested, well, why don't we create roles like this within the business, where we have this hybrid approach of an engineer and a technician that does both those roles. And this was probably back in the early 2000s. And it was just a little bit too early to think about the transition from those traditional roles into that blurred role back then. So I was told, no, you just carry on doing what you're doing. Again, and this was probably when I started thinking more about the business outcome of why I was doing what I was doing, and trying to translate that into a conversation back to leadership to say, the reason that I'm doing this is because it's removing all of this waste that currently exists within the industry. And they were like, again, yeah, it's great. You carry on doing that on your own projects. And at the time, that was when I'm starting to look at tools that are for interoperability and like building my own tools to move information backwards and forwards. And all of that was additional to my core role. So that was what I'd do in the evenings and on the weekends. And coming back to like our earlier conversation around understanding the value of what we're doing, all of those things that were really giving good commercial outcomes were things that I was doing in my own time because I was passionate about it, but it wasn't seen as something that was beneficial to the business overall. It was just me on my projects. Right. So after working for Arup for nearly 20 years, I did 10 years in the UK and then 10 years in Australia. I said, I really think we need to create a business stream that is focused on this interoperability and removing waste. And I just finished a BIM Masters where we studied Toyota and how Toyota operate and how Toyota look at removing waste along the process, making sure you're adding value. But what I really loved about Toyota was it didn't matter where you were within the company. If you found something that was wrong that could be improved, you put your hand up and you stop the line. And that could be the factory worker, it could be the tea lady. It didn't really matter. And I just loved that because coming into a business where I was the trainee CAD technician, I think no matter how long I'd been at that company, I was still seen as the trainee CAD technician. And there was a traditional hierarchy where decision making was, well, you've got to get up to the top of that hierarchy before you can influence decision making. So essentially, we agreed at Arup that it wasn't the right time to do that. And so I was working on a project in Brisbane with a company called BVN Architects, who are a large architectural practice in Australia. And I was talking to them about some of the things that I was trying to do. And they just said, well, why don't you just come and join us, and we have a design technology group, and you can come in here and just look at our processes and the way that we deliver work and just look at how you can improve it. And for me, I was like, well, this is great because I really like the holistic approach to buildings as an engineer, an architect, a contractor. And I really like this idea of how we all come together to create a building. But after 20 years of engineering, I was like, right, okay, I'm just going to jump into architecture. So that was when I went into architecture, and then I realized that the problems that we had in engineering were almost the same as in architecture, that you just got so much waste. Right. And the biggest problem that we had within BIM Architects was just Revit and the performance of Revit. And I could see immediately, because every architect was in Revit pretty much all day, the amount of downtime that was just wasted for files to open, files to sync, crashing, poor model health, all of these types of things. And for me, immediately, I just saw inefficiency. And I think BVN appreciated that role did relate back to business outcomes, but I couldn't quantify exactly what that meant. I just said, look, if you have a good quality model, it means it opens quicker, it synchronizes quicker, you don't have as many crashes. And they got it, but it wasn't quantifiable. So back then, because I'm in Brisbane, Adam Sheath is a good friend of mine, and Adam was the CEO of BimBeats back in 2020. And I was talking to him about this problem we were having. And he's like, I'm creating a tool called BimBeats. And what BimBeats does is it automatically captures the quality of the model. It quantifies how long you're spending opening a file, synchronizing a file, how often it's crashing, when a file crashes, what was the reason for the crash, and all of the metrics around that. And I just said, this is the missing piece of the puzzle for me, because I need having that quantifiable metrics. When I go into a conversation with a leader, they don't want to hear about work sets. They don't want to hear about synchronization. But if I tell them every week we're wasting 100 hours waiting for files to open, that's 100 hours of billable time that could be spent doing something more meaningful. So then we rolled out BimBeats in 2020, and that was when BimBeats first came about. And back then, the way that the data was extracted was a little bit hacky, shall we say, and the dashboards weren't great. But, we iterated on that, and, taking notes from the lean startup, we definitely pivoted a few times on how that product was evolving and the dashboards. But when I went into a conversation with an exec about the quality of models and BIM type conversations, it was, this project here has 4 people working on it, and every week we're wasting 20 hours waiting for files to open and sync. If we improve those models, we can see that 20 hours will become 10 hours, or those types of conversations. And immediately there was a recognition for a BIM manager. And I'm like, yes, because up until that point, I think everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people saw the BIM manager as an additional role that was an additional cost that wasn't part of traditional architecture. Whereas now it was like, well, okay, at least we can quantify the benefits of having someone on there managing your models such that you can see the benefits in opening and synchronization times coming down, giving you guys more time. Then it evolved into something far bigger than that because in programs like Revit and Rhino, Grasshopper, Dynamo, CAD, we process the journal or log files, we can see what interactions people are having with the models. So in Revit, because you've got so many plugins, we could immediately see who the super users were who were regularly using those plugins and automating a lot of their workflows, and the people that weren't, but being able to pair them up on projects so that you could transfer those skills on the job, again, was just this like light bulb moment for me where training and support was something that we obviously wanted to have at the forefront of our strategy, but doing it on the job and understanding who could do that training, it was just there in lights. So that was really good. So I guess BimBeats evolved from being a tool that was automatically capturing model health to now being more focused on people. And I think that was what resonated most with me and with my career and my passion and purpose for what I want to do was like, I'd always worked 50, 60 hours a week, every single week. And I just thought that was the norm. But it was the norm with the high performers or the people that were really passionate about what they were doing. And I think a lot of organizations take those people for granted. And for me, this opportunity to use BimBeats to go, right, these are the superstars within your business and the people that are automating things, building tools. But now we can use those skills and try and scale it across the entire organization. So uncovering like quiet achievers, I think is my biggest kind of proud moment, I guess, with BimBeats, that it really does uncover those people who might be in the corner, might be working from home, and it doesn't matter whether you're working from home or in the studio, but you really uncover the value that those people add.
Right. Matt, there's so much here. I selfishly want to dive in deeper into some of the insight you've gotten on model health and also evolving into like kind of performance of folks using the models for reasons that I think our operations teams would really appreciate. But before diving in there, I wanted to ask you, why do you think, in your experience in the last few decades, I've heard a similar pattern whereby you've got some incredibly talented folks, designers that kind of move into expanding their skills into BIM. And a very common thing we hear is that on the one hand, they serve as really kind of the nexus, the translators for really broader project teams. Because in your own words, right, you're not just pushing lines, now you're pushing data. Right? We're talking about walls with materials, walls with dimensions. And often, on the one hand, you're seen as kind of the nexus and translator for broader project teams. But on the other hand, and I think this is what you alluded to, you're often kind of seen as like other, right? It's kind of like the BIM folks over there as kind of like an appendage almost to the core business. Has that been your experience? I mean, and then also like, is it just like, what do we do about it? I mean, is it just like better firms handle this better, or do we just need to see new business models that like at its core, BIM is the core, not necessarily kind of an ancillary add-on, if you will? How do we do this? Like, how do we think?
It's a huge challenge, obviously, but I think you're right. I think that we're at this transition now where data is the most important thing. It's like the oil or the gold, right? It's data. So we could have an entire conversation on AI and how AI is going to affect what we do. But really, it's all around the data that is available that enables AI to either be good or hallucinate, right? So a BIM model is essentially a database full of all of this rich information that still, I would say, in Australia on a normal commercial tower, 5% of that information actually feeds through the entire life cycle through to operations. 95% is still to produce a drawing, to go on site and build from a drawing. I am seeing a transition, and particularly around governments and organizations that have a mandate for the data requirements. I think, unfortunately, most of the time there's still a disconnect between the design, the contractor, and the operator as to the value of the data that you're handing over, and that is seen as an unnecessary burden sometimes. So why am I filling in all of this additional data at the early stage of a project where it's not going to be used until the end of the project? And in most cases, when it's handed over, the owner operator hasn't been involved in that conversation to understand, well, what are they getting anyway? But I think that is changing. And I think people, again, coming back to the value, it's when the value gets recognized for why we're adding in what we're adding in. If there is additional work required for each of those individual stakeholders to provide that data and we can get paid for it, then I think people will be okay with it. But I think right now people see it as an unnecessary burden that we don't get additional fees for. Or right now, if you tender and you add in the additional cost of the management of the data component, you don't win the job. So we're at this transition of deciding if we charge for what we think the work is involved in doing this work, we probably won't win the job. If we don't charge, we've got to decide, do we lose money by doing that work? Or in many cases, I've seen people go, well, no one's really auditing it when we hand it over anyway. So therefore, what can we get away with? And
Right.
I'm seeing this transition slowly. And I think we will get to a point where that is the expectation and the deliverable won't just be seen as a drawing. It will be seen as a data and a BIM. And, to what you guys are doing, that digital asset of the physical asset exists in every other industry, in every other realm,
Right.
but buildings.
Yeah.
And the value of having that digital twin, for want of a better word, hasn't really come to fruition. But I think soon we'll start getting examples of how much time and money that has saved businesses. And then we'll start getting those examples.
One of the things I think about often is that I think that the tooling is evolving much faster than the business models of A&E firms. An example is exactly what you just outlined, right? Like we have tools now that now do enable us to design spaces, quantify spaces, schedule spaces, extract information in forms that are quite valuable for business insight. And yet when you pair the capability combined with maybe the kind of the, call it the legal or liability structures of what like a traditional architecture firm should do versus engineering versus contractors, that isn't keeping up, right? Because to your point, there's no incentive really for an architect to kind of go out of their way to add additional information that they may be liable for, or maybe they see someone else's job. So I see a massive disconnect, and also an opportunity for new kinds of businesses, and kind of like your business, right? BimBeats is kind of representative of just a form of just like kind of evolution of these business models.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think computational design is one area where I see huge value, but a lot of that value doesn't translate to traditional business models. I'll give an example of, and again, data that I see in BimBeats is I can see who's scripting things and who's using computational design tools to then have a conversation with those individuals around, well, what are you doing? So a great example is an engineer within ADG Engineers, who I work a lot with, had automated the process of optimizing every column in a high-rise building so that it would have the optimum amount of concrete, the grade of concrete, and the reinforcement. And they were working with the contractor to talk about, when you procure concrete and steel, the rates of those materials change on a regular basis. So when you design the building at design development, or DD, what you're assuming is the most optimal design might not be what the optimal design is when they come to procure the steel and the concrete. And Miles, who's one of the engineers within ADG, had written this script where he basically puts in a price for the concrete, a price for all of the steel, and runs his Grasshopper script, and it comes through and automates the process of optimizing every single column in a building. Now, on a high-rise building, that's literally millions of dollars of savings. And same with walls. But the way that we won that work is a percentage of the construction cost, where there's no incentive to optimize the building. So the benefits that you're getting there is you're getting a more sustainable design because you're using less material, because you're optimizing the design. You're reducing the construction costs, which obviously is a benefit to everybody. But the traditional procurement or the traditional contracting method is, well, you're getting paid a percentage of the construction costs. So if you rationalize the design and it takes you less time to do it, then what's the benefit, or what's the incentive?
Right.
Whereas with computational design, he could redesign the entire building in like all of the columns in like an hour. But there's no business model to reflect the value back again, unless you have an agreement with the contractor that they've already locked in their price and they know that that's a saving to them, and you can negotiate, well, if I can do this for you and we save $1 million, should we share those savings? So I'm seeing those type of agreements happening, but it's on an ad hoc basis rather than an holistic approach where everybody comes on board and goes, right, how do we do this better using the tools and technologies that we have? And coming back to your original point, that are data informed decisions, not just anecdotal decisions or just what's the quickest way we can build something.
On a personal level, your perspective now is at a different side of the table. You're now the CEO of a kind of growing technology services company. What are you seeing now that perhaps was harder to see in your previous roles at kind of architectural engineering firms? I have to imagine, obviously, your day-to-day looks slightly different than what I did before, but what has that kind of added to your perspective as you think about just the broader industry?
Yeah, look, I'm still very hands-on, which I like. I literally still do demos with clients, and I still get into their databases and understand what's happening. So I think what I like about the role and still being quite a small business is that I now see what's happening across all businesses, and I can see what are common trends. Like what I thought was happening within one business is that common across all businesses. And it's probably worth pointing out right now is that every client owns their own database of information, and BimBeats doesn't collate all of that information to see it unless those clients allow us to see it. So when we set up the databases for each of our clients, it's in their own environment. So we don't harvest any of that data and do anything with it. But if they share it with us, then obviously we can benchmark certain things. So I think from my point of view, in terms of like the role of the CEO now is just having this holistic view across all of our clients to see where is industry really at and connect that with the anecdotal evidence. That to me is the most powerful thing. Things in the CEO role that I hate admin, I hate sales and marketing, I hate doing invoicing and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, as you're probably aware, they're the things that are not the most enjoyable part of the business. With sales and marketing, I'll be completely honest. Like we have a lean team, and I want to put all of the investment into the product. I want to build the best product and give the client the best client experience. And in my mind, sales and marketing is a cost for our business that has to get passed on to a client that doesn't add value to them. So that to me is probably my biggest frustration in the role. And I think it probably comes from being on the client side and understanding like what value any product gives you, and knowing that we're not an Autodesk when we don't have unlimited marketing budget. And even if we did, I wouldn't want to be spending it on things that don't add value to the product. And again, be good to get your insights into this because I'm sure you go through something very similar.
I love it. It's spoken like a true kind of like product first CEO. We need more. We need more CEOs like that. But yes, I think generally to do good by your customers, your clients, you want to limit as much of that overhead as possible. So much here. Oh man, I think from a selfish level, I want to understand kind of like the nitty gritty, like what you've learned to the extent that you can share. You've had that privilege kind of looking at kind of BIM data across multiple organizations to the extent that, maybe it's just general insight. But what have you learned? What are some of those kind of underlying threads that you see from business to business to business that everyone's, perhaps it feels unique to them, but in fact, it's actually quite a universal challenge?
Yeah, I'd say the most common one is, particularly when you engage with the IT departments of businesses, is how much time is wasted opening and syncing a Revit file. So I think BIM managers know, but when you go beyond the BIM managers, just the amount of time that is wasted is something that isn't really very well understood. Yesterday, I was on a call with a client and I said, and this extends on your question, it was when you have files that are greater than 750 megabytes, if you try to open the entire model with all of the work sets and all of the links, it is significantly affecting your downtime. And I pulled up the dashboard that showed anything from 45 minutes down to 20 minutes was the median time to open a very large project. And the IT guy was like, wow, it really frustrates me when when I open a program and it takes me 30 seconds to wait for a program to open. And I'm like, yeah. And I think because if you're in architecture and Revit in particular on large projects, you just become immune to the fact that when you open up a file in the morning, if you're on an airport or a commercial tower or a hospital or a school or a large project, but you do wait 10, 15, 20 minutes for a file to open. And the guy in IT was just like, this is incredible. In any other industry, you would not get away with that. And that was when I started saying, well, you can improve that by opening up selected work sets, structuring the model in a certain way, building families in a certain way, and started getting a little bit technical. But that was then all coming back to, that's why you have this guy. That's why you have your BIM manager. And now we can showcase like how much time and money saved. So that's probably the biggest insight. The other one, which again, this is actually outside more so of BIM and CAD, in that BimBeats has a function called active window. And what active window does is it takes your active monitor and it records the process that you're running and the time that it's spent in that process. So if you've got Revit open, we're in Riverside, I might have Teams open here, it records the actual time you're spending in each piece of software. So at the end of the week, you can see, well, what did I do during that week and what did I put on my timesheet? So
Right.
understanding what's put on a timesheet versus what actually happened. When I have conversations with execs around where do you think you spend time or your business spends time? And the biggest insight from all of this is that we don't spend that much time designing, whether it's in architecture or engineering. The amount of what I'll call administration tasks that don't particularly add value is so high. So BimBeats, because of this tool, it goes across every single piece of software. So I'm talking Outlook, Excel, Word, wherever, your timesheets, your ERP system, your CRM, whatever. And we found within one engineering firm that they were spending 20% of their time in Bluebeam doing markups. And the dollars that equated to was so much more than what the executive team believed was being spent on that. They thought that most of the time was in engineering software, but the reality was that it wasn't. And the other insight in an architectural firm was that the amount of time spent in Revit by project directors, they were like, no, project directors shouldn't be in Revit for 8 hours a day. So these kind of organizational insights to me has probably been the most eye-opening to really understand the digital footprint of a business outside of CAD and BIM to go, okay, now with AI tools and building agentic AI, how do we evolve that to spend more time doing design and less time doing administration tasks? And I think that for me is where we're at right now. And the really exciting point with BimBeats is using that data to go, well, if we're going to build agents to offset some of these manual tasks, we can now start quantifying exactly how much of that time is being spent currently. If we're going to spend money on building agents, like how do we get that money back? But more importantly, giving people more valuable work to do rather than the type of admin tasks that they don't really want to be doing anyway.
This is so interesting to me. Maybe to share a little quick anecdote with you and listeners here. So we're often working on behalf of multi-location owner-operators. So think folks that kind of own and operate a ton of footprint around the country or the world. And we're providing scan and BIM services. One of our kind of value propositions is that we will provide a service, scan to BIM, with a predictable level of cost and turnaround time. So as you can imagine, if we say, for example, something will take 48 hours or 72 hours or whatever it might be, this is a value proposition that like fundamentally as a business we deliver. And so we hold on-time delivery as a kind of a core metric of the business. If we're, below 90%, we, kind of all hands on deck to your point, kind of raise our hand, like what's going on here. So I think our team has found value, and I think what you're building in that literally core to our business is if we promise 48-hour turnaround times because of a certain size of a building or maybe complexity because it has architectural systems, mechanical systems, furniture systems, I'd like to know, my team would like to know what is keeping us from delivering on time. And so what we discovered is exactly what you pointed out. It turns out that the actual modeling time itself in Revit is actually relatively small compared to just us being humans, right? Like having to take a break or go to sleep or, do this and that. And that insight was actually quite profound because, well, there's only so much you could do there. And it does beg the question for me and the team at kind of an operational level, like, well, how can we build tooling, right, to accommodate for a lot of this downtime? As one of the large CEOs once said, like, if you ask your customers like what they want, I can guarantee you in 10 years from now, they're going to ask you to do whatever you do just faster.
Yeah.
So we're always just trying to do things faster and faster and faster. And so anyway, I say a long way of saying, I think fascinated by what you're building. And I'm sure we're not the only ones in kind of trying to discover this insight in terms of our operations.
Yeah, look, I'll go back to Preston's podcast with you guys talking about standardization. Like it allows you to look at where you have standards and processes within your business and really understand, are they being followed? Because if you have a good series of standard processes and they are being followed, that's how you can guarantee your 48-hour delivery. It's when you defer away from those standard processes and you start bringing in multiple variables that don't exist, that's when there's uncertainty and that's when you don't know how long something's going to take to deliver. And obviously with computational design and scripting, a manual task that will have taken 4 hours now maybe only takes 15 minutes. So you've got huge opportunity to reduce that time frame. But a conversation I had recently, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, is we had a project where the contractor arrived on site and the ground conditions weren't what they thought they were when they did the original geotechnical report. And it meant that the foundations needed to be redesigned very quickly. And for every day that they were waiting, obviously they'd got everybody on site just sitting waiting for the foundations to be redesigned. Now, we had a computational design workflow to go back into that design, put in the new parameters for the geotech, and we could spit it out in half a day. Now, the value to the client was, I'd say, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the time it took us to do that work may have only been 2 or 3 hours. Now, if we go back to your original point around billing and the business model, traditionally we'd go, oh, well, that's 3 hours of an engineer's time. That's, say, $700, whatever the number is. But that value to the client is millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So do we go back and say, well, traditionally that would have taken a week and we can charge $10,000 for that work because it's a week's worth of time? Or do we say it's $10,000 and I'll get it to you this afternoon? Because it's $10,000, I'll get it to you this afternoon, you can carry on working. But how are you going to react to that saying it's going to cost you $10,000 and I can get it back to you in a couple of hours? Now, the reality is getting it back in a couple of hours was the best result for everybody, because you could continue to work. But I think our industry struggles with, well, $10,000 for 2 hours worth of work. Like, are you sure?
Yeah.
But like, if you guys have a scan to BIM process, that means you're automating, grabbing that point cloud and creating a BIM model in an hour. You shouldn't be charging an hour for it. You should be charging, well, what is the value of the thing I'm handing over to you? But I think, like, and again, keen to get your thoughts. Like, have you had conversations with clients around that? Because we just traditionally, or most of the conversations that I have, well, no, we bill by hour.
Right.
And that's where I think we've got to move away from that.
Well, man, I haven't really spoken about this publicly, and so I apologize if maybe I kind of sound a little scatterbrained here, but I think you nailed something that I fundamentally believe is it's weirdly broken. I struggle to define what we do in terms of hours, and we purposefully have done essentially not presented our work in terms of hours at all. One of the things that I think, as a startup ourselves, what we had to solve for is, okay, what is like one line item in a project whereby that line item exists in most renovation projects. And we kind of landed on this kind of as-built scan to BIM survey line item. Now, in every market, there's kind of a different price point, but more or less there's a range as to, what scan to BIM usually will cost. So we kind of had to start there. Sure, there's kind of RFPs and clients that kind of reach out and force you to kind of lay out your work in terms of hours. But for the most part, what we tried to do is kind of flip that script and just landed on, okay, what is the range by which the square footage cost of this thing is? Whether it's 30 cents a square foot, 40 cents a square foot, 50 cents a square foot, whatever that might be, and kind of work backwards.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, by taking a kind of a fixed price approach. So essentially, we've landed on, if a client knows their square footage and if they know their scope, by scope, we're referring to kind of architecture, furniture, and MEP.
Yeah.
We can take any scan, create that model in terms of the size and the scope, and we will essentially price it at kind of a square footage price point that we believe is both competitive but kind of fits within the range of the market, if you will. Now, we have every incentive if we do that to then optimize our process to just get more efficient. To your point, essentially what might take others, say 100 hours, we might be able to do it for 50 hours. But our price point is actually tied or fixed rather. And where we start to kind of discount is more on the kind of the volume based. So if you have 2 or 10 or 1,000 locations, so we could start to kind of accommodate those discounts. But a little bit long-winded of a response here, but I think you're nailing something that I just fundamentally believe needs to be reframed, I think, in AE, because with the kind of the hourly structure, we're literally incentivizing people to spend time to bill money. So you're incentivizing just more time. I'm sure this is not a profound insight here, but I mean, how do you address this in your business? Because you're kind of being asked sometimes to, I guess, price your time.
Yeah, I guess with BimBeats itself, like, we're a subscription service. It's a monthly or yearly subscription based on the number of licenses. So for us, ironically, the return on investment for all of our clients really comes down to software license management, believe it or not, across all of their software. It's not really quantified by the benefits for operational efficiency. It's because, coming back to that active time spent in a piece of software, you can quantify on licenses that are not named user licenses, how many concurrent licenses you need to operate. So most of our clients just pay for BimBeats by going, well, I'm saving money on the licenses of all of these pieces of software that I now know how many I can accurately plan how many licenses I need. So our business model was never supposed to be that, but that's pretty much how we justify the ROI immediately on BimBeats. But I don't think our business model will change because it won't affect us. I think it's more around architects and engineers working out how they can scale those efficiencies across a business, because still typically it only happens in pockets, but understand how that you can provide value to your client by doing that, but also get some of that revenue back into your business. And to your point, like I've seen on projects, and the BimBeats data shows it. For example, let's just say tagging boreholes. This is a real example where there was a contractor who said, I'm getting paid by the hour to tag boreholes. And it was like, I've got a week's worth of work on this project to go in and go into the file and just literally tag every single one of them. And I'm like, but we have a routine that I can see other parts of the business using that just literally does that in an automated process. Now, for the individual, it was like, well, I get paid by the hour. I want to spend 40 hours doing that task. I don't want to automate it. And potentially, depending on how that contract was set up, if they were getting paid by hours, then it might be, well, no, I actually want him to take 40 hours to do that role because I can charge the client 40 hours. And to me, it makes no sense whatsoever. But at least in BimBeats, we have that full transparency of, well, here's a project that didn't do that and they use the optimization routine and they've just got a tool that does it. Whereas here's a project that doesn't, and here's the alternate approach. So what I'd like to see is just evolving to that process of like understanding efficiencies, effective ways of using the tools, and just scaling that, and then translating that to a business model that makes sense for everybody, rather than this race to the bottom with just reducing fees. And I think the risk that we have right now is that a lot of clients see AI as an opportunity to get things done cheaper because, you're not spending as much time, therefore it's cheaper. But there is a cost associated to all of these things. Like the time to build a routine to optimize something doesn't just happen. And there's a lot of risk involved in, well, how are we going to build that? It's going to fail. When it does fail, like, what do we learn from that? And there is that upfront investment that you have to make. So with the column optimizer tool that I was talking about, yes, that may only take 2 hours now to do something that would have taken a week, but it didn't just happen. Like it went through iteration after iteration after iteration of research and development to get that to a point where that tool is nice and efficient. And it comes back to, I think, again, something that Preston mentioned about repeatable processes or standardization. You've got to go, well, how many times do we do this process across every project, across the entire organization? And if we scale this across the entire organization, then that's going to come back to us like tenfold, hundredfold in terms of efficiency. But every project still is typically delivered as an individual project. And you finish that project, you start the next project, and the next project starts as if you started from scratch again.
I have I'm very careful to share my existential crisis here with most, but I appreciate you might feel some of this. I really do think that at the macro level, ultimately, all knowledge is nearing zero cost eventually. And what I mean by that is like, if I zoom out for a moment and just kind of take a look at like all the emerging technology players that are servicing AEC, what I'm starting to see is that you're seeing pockets of people solving like very, very, very specific things that traditionally have kind of been done by large firms, right? You see pockets of companies like ours doing scan to BIM, like a very specific, like traditionally seen as the kind of surveying or as-built space. You see a lot of software kind of in the test fitting space, layout planning space. And you're starting to kind of see different pockets, materials. And when you take a look at these pockets, there's a general trend from building SaaS to building kind of do it for you service that I think has been uniquely enabled by AI, in that you're starting to see here's a tool for you to design, to like, here is a service for you to generate things for you, right? And you're almost kind of playing the role of a curator or editor as opposed to just kind of starting from a blank slate. And I think in general, that's kind of where I think a lot of these pockets are moving to. And so when you kind of play that out, I can't help but to believe that the traditional AE industry will have to reckon with the fact that eventually when you put all of these pockets together of like kind of do it for you services that are drastically different cost structures than the incumbent, when you put them all together and you start to kind of stitch these together and they're starting to get more streamlined, we're looking at effectively doing A to Z services that, at one point was kind of this very bloated fee, if you will, because you needed to cover your overhead and whatnot, down to something that, we're talking about, pennies to the dollar, if you will. Do you see it differently? Like, I'm curious, what am I maybe missing here? But as I kind of like zoom out, like I'm seeing like these kind of general trends move us towards faster and closer to zero, if you will. And so it begs the question for me is like, where can we continue to add new value?
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think it's happening slower than I would expect it would, but I think it is happening much quicker now with AI. Um, and Hyper is an example where I think their philosophy has always been reuse something what you've done before. Don't start from a blank page. And I just think everybody should be thinking about that as a philosophy. I think one company that I think has completely come around to disrupt the way that we work is a company called Consigli.
Okay.
So Consigli is actually an AI data driven company that has no engineers. I think their service is that they hire out agents to do preliminary service design on certain types of buildings in Norway, right? They've got this thing down pat because they've basically got an agent that will do the prelim I think it's mechanical services of a building, and it will be optimized and it will do essentially what you would normally do with a mechanical engineer if you went to a traditional consultant. And we'll literally do it in no time at all. And it's done with zero engineers. It's literally done with hiring out agents. And to me, that is the Uber of our industry, where someone has come into the industry, tried to go, well, why are you doing that same thing over and over and over again? And what you're actually providing me is not optimized anyway. And I can do that through agentic AI.
Right.
And to me, something like that is where that's going to be the game changer, because we will realize, well, okay, we don't have this safety net anymore. Right. And with that particular business, it stops at a certain point. You can't go and build from that design because of obviously everything that you need to do from a legality point of view. Right. But to me, like that is, well, they've seen that when you get to schematic design for a mechanical system in a hospital, for example, why do I need a human to be involved in that at all? Because we're not building from that. It's just to get a price. It's just to provide a design that works. And we've just got so much waste in that traditional process. Like to that point, why don't we just go off and get AI to do it? And companies like Swap are basically going, well, I can turn a sketch into a full building model and set of drawings in a day, like essentially. And obviously it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think we're getting to that point. And to your point, like, how do you then charge for that? And like, what is the additional value? And to me, everything is time and money. And it's always, everything takes longer than you typically think it does, and budget overruns and time overruns. So what we're doing, we're mitigating the chance of that happening. But I still think everybody starts their project going, I know that 90% of projects are over time and over budget, but my project won't be. So
Right.
So I guess I don't know if I have an answer to your question, but I think we're probably at the same point of just trying to go, well, what does this mean, and how do we add value or where do we get value if things are just literally taking no time to get to 80% of the solutions almost immediately.
Right. Not just kind of a reduction in time, but also a reduction in cost. And so naturally, for example, if you achieve a breakthrough that, for example, you're doing, even if, for example, you decided to price that job that traditionally costs $10,000, even if you price it at 8,000 or even 2,000 for that matter, I think what you'll likely be facing is that, well, now you need to achieve a certain level of scale to kind of accommodate for the fact that now you're doing, I guess 5 times more cost effectively than where firms could have maybe been okay with 10 projects. Maybe you're doing 100 projects as a result in scale. And I think that that's going to continue to kind of exacerbate as, the cost of production or services continues to near zero. There's going to be players that I believe are going to essentially need to scale at a massive rate, but not everyone can scale at that massive rate. So it's just, I'm facing this kind of existential thread where it's like, if you let it kind of play out, there's this kind of a discrepancy and gap of like the haves and, the have-nots, and that like, I think it's going to be a volume game. Those that crack that kind of continued near zero production and then just achieve scale leaves little room for others who haven't cracked that. Right. Which again, I guess in the context of AE, it's like eventually, perhaps not now. And I'm sure this likely will kind of play out across, years or decades here. But as it does continue to near zero, like the AE traditional model will have to respond somehow.
You would think so, right? You would think it has to.
I guess there only could be so many like AirUps or SOMs. Like I guess for most of kind of the other players, everyone's kind of trying to figure it out here. But anyway, I'm here kind of sharing in the existential thread of the kind of the macro impacts of AI. But I guess you having the benefit now of several years in the industry between where you started as a kind of an early structural engineer to where you are today. I'm curious, what would you tell that young Matt, decades ago, kind of coming into this market in 2025?
Yeah, it's interesting. I often reflect on this. I think from day one, I have always been really curious, really passionate about whatever I do, and I'm comfortable putting in my own time on top of my work time. And to start with, when I started as a CAD technician, I was like, right, I need to become an engineer. And that was 4 years of part-time study. Then I needed to be chartered and I needed to do that. And I think every decision I made, I don't regret the decisions I made because I think it's got me to a point where I'm at this juncture between so many different parts of engineering, construction, technology. But back then, making a decision like that would take a lot of time and effort. Whereas now, for example, coding, like let's talk about visual coding and just text-based coding. If I'd have said I want to get into that 5 years ago, the effort that it would have required me to do that without having AI to help me do that would have been like huge. Whereas now I think the ability to learn something new and apply it and get value from it with the help of AI is just so much easier to be able to not continuously pivot, but look at learning a new skill and just extending your skill set. And I think if I was to go back and talk to Matt 30 years ago and go, Matt, in 30 years' time, you'll have AI to assist you with all of these things and it will just make your life so much easier. I decided to do that 30 years ago and it wasn't the norm to keep transitioning or to go from a technician to an engineer. Whereas now I think my advice would be with AI and the ability to learn things so much quicker and to be able to broaden your skill set outside of what a core role is would be my one piece of advice to anyone. And I think having complementary digital or data skills to whatever your core role is something that will mean you're always employable. You're always going to have something that's fulfilling and enjoyable and something that I think you'll always be continuously passionate about. Whereas I think if you went into a role 30 years ago and you were an engineer, you pretty much did the same thing all day, every day. And that was what you did. Whereas now I think if as a graduate coming into the industry, you'll come in with a baseline knowledge of engineering or architecture, which will never go away, right? I'm not suggesting that you don't need to go through a core learning of the core part of the role. But when you come into a business, to be able to evolve your role across so many different opportunities that will present themselves in the future is something that's pretty exciting because the ability to do it will be so much easier than what it would have been years ago when you wanted to transition or move from one role to a different role. I'd say that's the one piece of advice that if I went back to myself 30 years ago and go, do you know in 30 years' time it's going to be so much easier to move between these different roles? Then hold off and wait 30 years. But luckily now, if you're in that position where you're coming in from graduate school, uni, whatever, or you're at school, knowing that the ability to learn new things and having those complementary digital skills, I think is the one piece of advice I would give myself.
This has been really fun. For those listening in, how do they find you? How do they stay kind of continue following your journey?
Yeah, BimBeats.com is probably the best place if you want to find out anything about BimBeats itself. I'm actively on LinkedIn pretty regularly, so hit me up on LinkedIn. And yeah, if anyone wants to find out more about BimBeats, either the website or just hit me up on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, Jose.